My name is Amanda.
And I'm Kristin.
And we are the Exorcisters. So sit back, relax, and let's get creepy. Welcome to episode 22. And in this episode, we are going to dive into 1999's The Blair Witch Project on its 20th year anniversary.
Yes, it is.
So I had seen this before. I saw it when I was a teenager, and I guess as a teenager it wasn't gratifying enough for me, and I remember just being super bored the whole time. So I wasn't super excited going into this one. But when we were watching it, it was also right after we recorded, after drinking a lot of wine. But that being said, I appreciated it a lot more now. I actually enjoyed it.
I'm glad.
For something different. You know, I think as a teenager, especially somebody that, you know, grew up watching horror movies, it was all about that instant gratification, that jump scare, that kill, that torture. And that was the era that I grew up in, the Saw era, you know, and the Paranormal Activity era. So with Blair Witch, you know, watching it, it's not slow, but it's more creep factor with this movie than it is like jumpy or...
It's definitely like putting yourself in it.
Yeah. It's a headspace kind of movie. And you saw this when you were a teenager as well, but you enjoyed it then.
I saw this when I was young.
Oh, young.
I mean, I was 9 when this came out. I saw it probably about then.
Oh, okay.
Like, I remember,
so you saw it pretty much as soon as it came out then.
Yeah. My mom and I used to go to this little Blockbuster and pick up movies, and I remember I saw this, I swear it was around probably the same time that I saw Scary Movie, I think. And obviously very different movies, but I remember both of those time frames. And this scared me so much because, stupid me, she got this movie for us to watch. Well, I was homesick one day, and I'm like, I'm going to watch this by myself. It's not that scary. And, of course, I also waited because she was at work late.
Goofed. Yeah.
And I was like, fine, I'm going to watch it if she's not coming home. So I watched it at night by myself in the dark at 9 years old.
That's pretty brave, though. I gotta give it to you. I still won't do that.
Yeah.
Unless it's a certain genre of movie. I'll watch them by myself, but not Home Alone.
Yeah, this one definitely creeped me out. And I remember around this time there was also like a mockumentary of the backstory of the Blair Witch, which it wasn't these kids, but it was more interviews from the townsfolk and stuff.
Yeah.
That, I think, scared me even more because there was even more backstory. And I remember watching that, too. I can't seem to track it down now. I can't find it.
Well, hit us up if you know what it is.
I remember watching it. It was creepy.
So this movie starts in October 1994, and it opens with, it's a found footage movie, first of all, which is your jam.
I love found footage.
Yeah, and this wasn't the first found footage movie, but it was early.
Yeah, the first found footage movie that we know of, maybe there was some random dude
Indie
in the
ones.
1920s that was doing it. The first one that we know of was Cannibal Holocaust in 81, I think was the year.
Oh, yeah, I didn't know that. But
that's crazy that we have such a big gap between them.
91 and 99.
Cannibal Holocaust, and then now we have Blair Witch, and then they're everywhere.
Yeah.
That's weird.
Well, I think it was the Blair Witch Project was so successful.
Yeah.
I mean, and Cannibal Holocaust too, but I think that was more of a cult film, cult following film than, more mainstream like Blair Witch.
Yeah, it holds records for the most amount of money on such a small budget. It was made for $60,000, and it earned $248 million.
Nice.
Somebody did the math online, and I thought it was interesting, so I don't know exactly what it was, but it's something like they made $10,000 to every dollar that they paid into it.
Wow.
Holy shit.
That's a good profit margin.
Yeah. And it remained the highest indie film until My Big Fat Greek Wedding in 2002.
I love that movie.
Those two haven't been passed since.
That's awesome. It tells you that in October of 1994, students disappeared in Burkittsville, Maryland woods, and their footage was found a year later. So a group of young adults headed into the woods for the weekend to investigate the tale of the Blair Witch. And this Burkittsville, Maryland was Blair, Maryland previously.
That sign has been stolen like 3 times.
Oh, I bet. And some of these adults are just meeting for the first time. If not all of them, I don't remember. And they've gathered up a bunch of food and a bunch of supplies, and they're getting ready to, like I said, spend the weekend like tent camping in the woods. And they're going around and asking the townspeople if they've heard of the Blair Witch, and they want the documentary to be as authentic as possible. And in Burkittsville, there's an unusually high number of children laid to rest that passed in the 1940s. The townspeople say they've heard stories In the winter of 1940, kids started disappearing and people didn't know why. Someone said that 2 men were out hunting and they were near her area and they completely disappeared. So her area being the witch.
You're right.
And then an old man came down from the mountain and said he was finished. And he didn't give that. He just said, I'm finished. And the police went up and found missing children all dead in his cabin. Mm-hmm. So the people definitely believe that the woods are haunted. And they go to the home of a citizen in the town named Mary Brown, who is seen as like the village crazy lady by the townspeople. And they interview her, and she said she had an encounter with the Blair Witch. She said they used to go fishing by the creek, and she was laying down on the leaves, and all of a sudden she felt something was near her, and it was a woman, but she had black horse-like fur all over her body and wore a shawl. She didn't say anything, but kept staring and opened up her shawl, and she was hairy from head to toe. Her face was strange looking. And then this lady also goes on to say she's a ballerina and a scientist and a historian, and so they're not really taking her story with much validity.
Which they talk about in the car, and I think Josh is driving.
Yeah.
He's not even paying attention. He's like looking down and looking over, but not looking out the window at driving.
You're going to kill somebody.
Yes.
At the end of the night, they're all in a hotel together. And this is the night before they go out. And they're celebrating a good first day, and they're checking all their equipment. So the tone here is important. So on the second day, they head to the trail and they don't meet up with them, but they encounter some fishermen. And they've also heard of the Blair Witch. And one of them is like, nah, there's nothing to it. And the other one is like, yeah, I don't know. Mm-hmm. And then they say, damn fool kids will never learn. And they tell the story of supposedly Robin Weaver wandered into the woods, got lost, and 3 days later, she reappears on her grandmother's porch. She was babbling about an old woman whose feet never touched the ground. The other man said he saw a white mist that rose out of the water up the side of a tree and disappeared. But then they say those things and they're like, but it's just bullshit.
Yeah,
because they're like, they don't want to give this theory any, I guess, couth, you know? They're just like, nah, that's not true. Or maybe they just don't want to seem afraid because they're big, burly men,
well, they're even out in the woods fishing. I don't think I'd want to admit it in case you're out there and it is real. I think I'd lie to myself.
Yeah. And then the crew of 3 get their backpacks and equipment and they head into the trail. And the girl is the head of this project. This is basically her baby.
And they smoke the whole time. Like, how 90s is that?
Yeah, and their outfits are super 90s. But her name is Heather. And she tells the story, and she's doing kind of this, like, narration piece to open up the documentary. And she says, they went into the woods prepared to find death. Upon a rock formation, the torture of 5 men was uncovered, and it was called Coffin Rock. Now, I didn't get that entire monologue she did at the beginning, but that was the gist of it. 5 men went in, and they all got fucked up.
Yeah, and they were like tied together in a circle or something.
It was very ritualistic, yeah. And quickly, it's already almost 5 p.m. and it's starting to rain, of course, which is cool because it's raining right now as we're recording.
Yeah.
It's spooky. Mm-hmm. If it starts thundering, we're opening the window and you're getting live thunder. One of the guys hears a noise at night. That's like my worst nightmare, being out in the middle of a woods with nothing but a tent and hearing a strange noise.
Dude.
Even if it's an animal.
Exactly.
Because it's probably a big one, like a bear or a mountain lion. Yeah. I'm not going to be able to beat that.
Even if it's like an elk or something, especially around October, like when they're in rut, I'm sorry, they're dangerous. Mm-hmm. They're going to get you. Yeah.
And it doesn't, get back in the tent. What is a tent going to do for you? They're just going to pick you up and drag you, you know? Exactly. He said he heard a cackling. And so it cuts to the next day, and that's they're just talking about it. You know, they're like, it sounded like a cackling and footsteps and all this stuff. And they're looking at the map and saying, you know, they're like, Heather, you're getting us lost. You're getting us lost. And she's like, no, we're not lost. I know exactly where we're going. Mm-hmm. She's very confident that she's not going to get them lost. And maybe this is a generational thing. I don't think I'd be able to read like a map of the woods when I was in the woods. Mm-hmm. Like, what markers do you have? Mm-hmm. I don't know. I know they have a compass and stuff, but how do you know which trailhead you're on if there's no mark? I mean, this is a forest that essentially doesn't really look that wandered into. It's not like it's a park where it's maintained or anything. It's just wilderness.
Well, that's why you stick to things that are easily mapped out, like the fucking river.
Yeah, exactly. You can follow that back. Mm-hmm. She says they're heading to the cemetery trail and they should hit it in 90 minutes. And she's still, again, very confident that she knows where they're going. One of the guys is really on her case about her being lost. So Josh and Heather are pretty, at this point in the movie, on the same page.
Which is interesting because in real life, those actors bickered the whole time, and it got so serious that, jumping ahead, but that's why they got rid of Josh early. It was actually supposed to be Mike. Yes. Because they bickered so much in real life. Which
probably made their bickering in the movie more real because they got to yell at each other in the dialogue.
Yeah.
It did sound, again, jumping ahead, but it did sound like they truly were screaming at each other and were,
yeah.
These actors went through a lot, though, filming this movie.
Well, yeah, in most of this, the script was so basic, like they kind of knew what was going on, but not really, that they were super scared at points that we see in the movie because they were actually scared.
Mm-hmm. I would hate that. There are so many, like Alfred Hitchcock, for example, or just directors that push their actors to the absolute limit to where it's almost cruel, but as an audience, you get, and the Exorcist, that director was a hard ass.
Yeah.
He put them through some shit.
I mean, skipping way ahead, the girl who plays Heather, she was so petrified at the very end. That last scene scared her so much that afterwards she had a panic attack and cried in the corner for an hour.
Oh my God.
Like in real life, after filming that scene. Because she had no idea what was happening. She didn't know what was going on.
She just started.
And it was so terrifying.
I bet. Well, and it's the same fears in the movie, you know. I'll save that for the end in case for some reason somebody hasn't seen this and they're relying on our walkthrough to get to it. But so Heather says, we'll all look back on this and laugh heartily when Mike is giving her shit for them being lost.
Mm-hmm.
And they cross a river and end up on a path. And this is the first sighting of these like symbolic branches and piles of rocks.
Mm-hmm.
So you see these branches and they kind of look like people. Like they're just sticks.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not. And it's hard to explain. It's just a symbol. It's the symbol you see on the front of the movie case. You know, it's just that same one. So you see these symbols and then these piles of rock. And there are 7 piles of rocks. And then it cuts to the dark. And they're sitting around a fire joking around. And later that night, they're out and they're filming the rocks. And one of them knocks a rock pile over and they try to just like put it back together.
Mm-hmm.
And
I love how she panics. That would be me.
Yeah.
I believe in that stuff.
Put that shit
like,
back.
Oh my fucking God.
How dare you?
Yeah.
You're going to get us all killed for knocking over that pile of rocks.
Yeah.
And then Heather later that night, even after this, turns the camera on and says they were sleeping, and she turns the light on and just yells hello into the woods. And they're listening and carefully walking in the woods, and they hear strange noises all around them, like coming from every direction. And Mike refuses to go down where they hear the noises. He's like, he will not go.
Fair.
I wouldn't. That is not my job.
And you're in the dark and you can't really see anything.
A camera light's not going to help you.
Exactly.
Flashlights aren't going to help you. That'll give you one beam of light pointed at the direction that you're pointing it at that moment.
Exactly.
It's not going to give you the light that you need in every corner, you know. And then it cuts to the next morning. And that's something that this movie does a good job of, I think, is there's so much implied fear and implied supernatural or haunting or presence or person. You know, it's not in your face, which as a kid, I was like, this is fucking boring. But as an adult, I'm like, ooh.
I love that you never see the witch.
Mm-hmm.
You were supposed to, but you actually never do.
Yeah. And so these night scenes, you know, they're going to continue to build up the long, you know, every night that they're there, it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And the next morning it's raining heavily and they're talking about what they heard last night. And Josh said he thinks someone is just messing with them. And Heather is adamant that no one knows where they are. And that's a lot of commitment if you just want to go out there and mess with somebody. You have to follow them the whole time. Otherwise, you're just not going to find them. They're not on the typical walking trails or along the river where all the fishing is happening. And they're walking around in the rain and they're concerned again because they're not going the way that they came. And Heather's like, 2 hours max to get where we're going. 2 hours max. And Heather says they have to go around to get to the car. So they have to go around instead of going straight through like they got in, which doesn't make sense. And you can kind of tell I don't really know, but if we keep walking, we're going to get somewhere. And they're questioning her again, and they're so persistent, and she's still insisting she knows exactly where they're going. And they're starting to argue again about where they are, and Heather thinks they should camp again because it's going to get dark, and the guys are screaming and freaking out, especially Mike.
I found it interesting to consider that they didn't have satellite phones or cell phones or anything back then, and nowadays that would be part of a movie. Of at least the phones wouldn't work.
They
but
wouldn't
at least
have signal.
That wasn't even an option for them.
It was the map and the compass.
That was a pretty cool note.
I wonder if nowadays, too, anybody, like, not experienced travelers or hikers or whatever would be smart enough to bring a compass. And on that note, know how to follow a compass.
Absolutely.
Or a map. You know, I can say, I was taught how to read a map and a map legend and all that crap not crap, but all that stuff in school. But it's been such a long time.
Yeah.
Since we've had to break out an atlas on a road trip, you know, you have to wonder if you were in that situation, how prepared would you be or how ill prepared would you be?
Absolutely.
Because of the era of technology we're in right now. Because I would personally consider, you know, I don't even get signal going 10 minutes down the street from my house. I just completely lose it. And so I'd be like, you know, we need to plan in case our phones go out. Or I would probably be one of those people that was like, carving symbols into trees or something, you know, some sort of marker for myself because I'm not, you know, outdoorsy or inclined to be. And so I wouldn't know how otherwise, other than making like a trail for myself, how to get through that. Or following the river, like you said. But that's not an option for them because they got to get off the beaten path.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I would stick with the river.
Yeah. Also, before we talk about this next night, there are cute little birds in the background. So if you hear that, we don't have the window open or anything. They're just singing away. It's a much more pleasant noise than this next night that our campers experience here. So they have to camp again. And the guys have really started losing their patience. They were supposed to get back to the car already. Yeah. They're supposed to be back to work tomorrow. Yes. They need to get the equipment that they rented back. And so they're starting to freak out about all that stuff. And Heather is again insisting that they're close. And cut to later. And they're inside the tent hearing the same thing they heard the night before. There's like thrashing and crashing all around them. And Heather turns the camera light on. And Heather again is asking, hello? Just out into the wilderness. She's freaking out because it doesn't necessarily sound like animals. And it's coming from all sides. Yeah. Just completely surrounding them. And you get a black screen for a little while. And then you just hear, it sounds like footsteps. And then it's 3 a.m., which is just like the worst time ever. Ghosts, demons, apparently witches. Everybody loves 3 a.m.
Literally, I woke up at 3 a.m. the other night and I had to pee. That was my body telling me I had to get up. I literally laid in bed for an hour until it was 4 and then got up and peed.
Then it was safe to get up.
Yes.
You lost the whole last hour because you're like, no, I'm not going out there.
Literally.
I'm not going out into that hallway.
I've seen way too many horror movies for that.
You're going to get up and something's going to fall off your wall and you're going to be like,
I would have peed myself.
You would have solved 2 problems at once. You wouldn't have to go to the bathroom anymore and you could just go back to your bedroom and you would have peed. So the next morning, there are new piles of rocks outside their tents. And there are 3 piles. And they're positive that they weren't there before. So first of all, that would immediately be to me, oh, that's it. We're dead.
Exactly.
That's our grave. That is our signal from this witch that we are done. I'm going to sit here in this fucking tent. I'm not going to wear myself out walking. She's going to come back and get us anyways. We just got to wait till the night. I don't even care. I'm done. And then Heather lost the map. But she didn't lose the map.
Exactly.
The map was taken by, I don't know, the Blair Witch maybe. Whoever is hunting.
Whoever kicked it into the fucking river.
Yep. And she's convinced that one of them had to have taken the map, that she didn't actually lose it because she's like, it was right here in this pocket. I know exactly where it was. And now Josh and Heather are arguing. So Mike's been going at Heather this whole time, and Josh has been like, calm down, dude. It's going to be fine.
Josh has reached the end now.
Yeah, now they've all reached their limit, but Heather feels responsible for them being out there because this is her project. So she's still trying to be like, no, it's fine. We know where we're going, da-da-da. You know, and now both the guys are like, no, we're fucked. And they just start, they're at the end of their rope here. And Josh and Heather are still arguing about the map when they decide that they're going to follow the creek. And again, Josh is losing it. And he says, all blame aside, this is really fucked up. Mm-hmm. And Josh is saying people are going to notice that they didn't get back when they said they would, and that people would come looking for them. And then I made a note, how much battery life do these cameras have?
Absolutely. That's a good point, yeah.
Like, that's when I said that, you know, how much battery do these cameras have? Because they're going this whole time. So, of course, they probably have battery packs and stuff for them. But they last days and days and days and days and days and hours and hours and hours. Mm-hmm. So, that's not that important. But it's something I was like, huh. She falls in the river because they're crossing it or the creek. And they're laughing at her. And she's, like, really agitated. And she blames them again for losing the map. And then Mike is losing it. And he's just laughing like a crazy person.
Maniacally, yeah.
And then he says he kicked the map into the creek. And now Heather is just screaming at him. And he's a fucking asshole. And if they die, it's his fucking fault. And then Mike is like, well, it was useless anyways. Mm-hmm. And they're still fighting. And now they're like, okay, well, we've got to use the compass. If heading this way didn't work, now we'll just go this way. Mm-hmm. And just walk. Because eventually we will find something.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you head east forever, you might eventually get to you're in Maryland. You're going to get to the ocean. Mm-hmm. If you head south forever, you're going to get to a different state. So, come on.
You're going to find civilization eventually.
At some point.
But it's like, how long can you hold out for? How long is your food going to hold out for? How long is your water going to hold out for?
That's exactly it, yeah.
How long can you withstand the elements? I mean, they're being rained on all the time. That's just...
how long can you outlast the Blair Witch?
Yeah. Well, even her aside, you still, your chances aren't great. But adding her in, you're royally fucked. Mm-hmm. So later that day, they find those weird symbols that look like people hanging in trees.
That would scare the fuck out of me. You're in the middle of the woods and you walk into that.
Because as they say, no redneck is this creative. Yeah. Like, they know. This is some fucked up shit.
Yeah.
And they're freaking out again because she's still filming all of this. And they're like, come on, turn it off. Turn it off. This isn't funny anymore. And she's like, no, I need to document this. And then Mike is just screaming into the nothingness for help, for someone to hear them. And Heather says, I think it's safe to say at this point we're lost and I don't know what to do. And she says that into the camera and kind of quietly to herself. And then there's another night in the woods. And they decide not to light a fire because they think that's how they were found the first time. Is because they lit a fire. And Heather wakes up gasping and she's terrified. And then they're all awake. And someone walked past the tent with like a raspy kind of gasp noise. Mm-hmm. That's so scary.
Yeah. So somebody's out there with you.
Yes. And they're rustling around and they run out of the tent. And then someone says, oh my God, what the fuck is that? And then
Is that when the tent was shaking? Mm-hmm. They didn't know that was going to happen. The director just said, go sit in the tent. And then he had everyone of the crew just shake the fuck out of it. So that was real fear when they were freaking out.
Because they didn't know what was going to come.
They had no idea.
Mm. Again, that's how directors get a lot of these really good reactions. They huddle together and then they turn the camera light off. And then it's a black screen with them whispering for a little bit. And the next morning,
you're still in the same fucking spot.
Yeah.
That theory scares the fuck out of me. Literally, you're so petrified that you're not going to go back. Added to the fact that you don't have any sort of psychological barrier like a tent could possibly be.
Because they run. They take off.
And you literally just huddle in this little... out in the elements. Anything can walk past you. Anything can be looking at you.
Looking
in the
down
dark
at you.
That you don't know.
Yeah. And then you, again, get that black screen. And the next morning you see that they just stayed out there all night.
Terrifying.
And they say they need to go back to the tent. And they get back there. And Josh's backpack was really fucked with. And it was just thrown around. And there was this, like, gooey stuff on it.
He said, KY jelly.
Gross.
In real life, yeah.
Use Vaseline. I feel like that would have been cheaper. She's like, well, why was it you, Josh? Why was it Josh? And they're mad that she's filming it still. Mm-hmm. And Mike and Heather are talking about Josh losing it. So it's interesting how this flipped because at the beginning of this little expedition, Mike was really critical of her. Mm-hmm. But now Josh is like losing his sanity. Mm-hmm. And so then Mike and Heather are like, okay, Josh is losing it. We need to try to stick together here to keep it together. So they're like newfound allies.
I would lose it because I would assume at that point, like he does, that
he's being hunted.
Yes.
Yeah, and he even says it later that they're being hunted. And Josh is crying off camera. He's just like huddled and crying. And Mike is telling her not to shove the camera in his face. And he says, what is this blue jelly shit all over my stuff? And he's all hung up on that, which is fair because you've been marked.
Yes.
And they're talking about having to set up camp again. And there's not a lot of daytime idleness in this. It gets to the evenings pretty quickly, which is nice because if it's not going to be a super like in your face kind of movie, at least get to the creepy parts
keep up
of it.
The pace.
Exactly. And whatever is in the woods, they know will come back. And they come across the same river and they think the same log they've already crossed. And Heather's trying to tell them it's not the same log, but she's crying and she has no idea. And then Heather
has broken down now too.
Yes, Heather breaks down and sobs and she tries to tell herself that it's okay. And Mike is now the one trying to keep everyone civil. And they decide that they need to take turns on watch while they camp. And then Josh is just antagonizing Heather about no one's going to help us. He's gotten to the point where he's like, this is it. We're going to die. No one is helping us. And you're stupid if you think that we're going to make it out of this.
Yeah.
And he's not soft about it anymore. He's just done.
Yeah.
And then they're back in the tent at night. And they're talking about the food they miss. And Heather is sewing, so at least they're kind of at this resolve. Like, I miss cheeseburgers and I miss this. And then she's sewing. And that seems like a therapeutic thing to do, I think, in the moment there is get your mind off. Well, it's not going to be off of it, but get your hands to do something.
Yeah.
Keep yourself busy. The next day, Heather is yelling for Josh. And then she turns to Mike and said, do you remember what he said yesterday about the shit on his pack? And Heather is panicking and crying. And it cuts to her sitting and talking about Josh not coming back and that she will need to carry the camera. And then Mike and Heather decide to go east since south hasn't worked. So, okay, we've walked south for 3 or 4 days now. So now we walk east. I think if I had walked one direction that long, I would probably just continue to walk that direction. I mean, it sucks though. In New England, you could walk through a forest and be, through a couple states and not, depending on where it is, maybe still not hit a town if you're just in that position to just walk through the forests, know. And then again, Mike and Heather are sitting together and they're talking about wine and pie and baths and their favorite thing to do on Sundays. And they're kind of sitting really close together and she's like leaning on him, so they're trying to be as humane to each other as possible.
Well, they're all each other has now.
Exactly. And then it's a new night and it cuts to a black screen. And they hear Josh dying. And he is crying and he is screaming for help. They essentially hear him being what sounds like tortured.
Yeah.
And they're yelling for him and she turns the camera light on and they're both crying and yelling for Josh. And, Heather, eventually they're not finding him and they can't pinpoint where it's coming from because it's like his voice is being thrown around in different directions. And Heather looks at Mike and says, Mike, please don't fall asleep. And he does. But I think at that point you're so exhausted. How do you not? I think the only way to sleep is to be to the point of exhausted where your body is like, you're laying down. I'm going to put you to sleep now. Yeah. You need to sleep. And they go outside the tent in the morning and she sees a bunch of sticks held together with bloody fabric from Josh's clothing. And she doesn't really look at it very much. She just throws it.
Yeah.
She's like, I can't deal with this.
She's like, I'm just moving it. Like, she's trying to be respectful, but also it has to get the fuck away from me right now.
Yeah, and she's filming like, I'm just going to put it over here, and we're going to put it there, and that's it. We're not going to do anything with it. We're not going to touch it. We're not going to open it. Nothing. And then Mike is rocking back and forth when she gets back, and he's saying, we'll just keep walking. We'll just keep walking. And then they're sitting, and they're rocking back and forth together. So Heather goes back to the sticks that she moved, and she didn't tell Mike that she moved this. She didn't tell him what she found. And she goes back and she again sees that it's drenched in blood and opens it. And I couldn't tell what this was at first, but you told me and it was a tooth in it. Yeah. If someone, and I don't know if this was post-mortem or what, but if somebody was yanking my teeth out while I was alive, that's why I couldn't stand, I know you haven't seen it, but the Human Centipede 2.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. Or any of them.
Yeah, he rips teeth out with pliers to better connect them. And that's literally, I couldn't with the teeth thing. I just couldn't do it. Yeah, I know your
teeth is like eyes, or me. Teeth
I can't do like teeth pulling or like another one. It was in The Possession, the one with the box. she makes the dentist's teeth all just like start falling. Oh, I just can't. So they walk, and they stop walking for Mike to eat a giant leaf. He's so desperate. He's literally just munching on this giant leaf. This poor guy. And then it cuts to night again. So again, it's so quick. Like it's daytime for like 5 minutes, and then it's night again. If 5 minutes. And that famous shot of her recording herself in the dark, crying, that's on covers and trailers and everything, is here. And she's apologizing. She's saying sorry to her mom and her dad, and she's saying, I love you. And she's basically just saying her goodbyes. Yeah. Hoping that this footage gets found, which in the beginning it tells you this was recovered a year later. Yeah. And so hopefully her family did get to see it. And she says that she was naive and she's sorry for what happened. She says it's her fault because it was her project. It's my fault we're here now, hungry and cold and hunted. And then she says, what is that? Mm-hmm. And she starts crying and panicking, and she's scared to close her eyes, and she's scared to open them. And she says, I'm going to die out here. And then it cuts to a black screen again. They turn on the camera and leave the tent. They hear what sounds like Josh yelling again. And so they're like, oh, maybe he's not dead. Maybe she just tortured him or something. And they're also going crazy. So they're like, Josh, you know, and they go out and they come across this house. The last thing I would do is go in that house personally. Last thing I would do. But they think Josh is in there, so they're better friends than me. And Mike goes in the house, and it's all dilapidated and falling in on itself, of course, because it's just out in the middle of the woods, not being taken care of.
Maryland, where, you know, it's humid and that stuff's going to rot out there.
Yeah, definitely. And especially because it's old, so it's all wood. It's not like there's brick and, you know. And
cute house, though.
Yeah, would have been, yeah. And then I said it's spooky even if it's not haunted. We had a house like this down the street from us when I was growing up, and Annie and I would go in it a lot. And it was like, the house was left and never returned to for some reason. There's open toothpaste, there's an open peanut butter jar, and it's just been sitting and rotting for decades and decades and decades and decades. They finally just knocked it down within the last couple years.
That's crazy.
I'll have to get Annie to tell you the story because I don't know it very well, and she's very close to this family, and I don't want to be disrespectful about what happened to this family, but he tended the garden until he was 100 years old and died, but would not go in the house.
Oh my God.
Side story, but yep. And it was the last house
Annie,
on our street.
Send in that side story.
We need to hear it. Yeah. And like I said, she was really close to him up until she even got a tattoo for him when he died. Anyways, it just reminded me a lot of that house. And I've been in a house like that. So I say, I wouldn't go in. But Annie and I did all the time. Yeah. There was wardrobes and clothing. And literally like they walked just out.
Up and left.
And left it. It's crazy.
It's insane.
Yeah. But anyways. And they hear Josh yelling again. And it sounds like it's coming from upstairs. So they run upstairs. And there are handprints all over the walls. And now Mike is convinced he's downstairs. And he books it downstairs. And Heather is screaming bloody murder from above him and is yelling, Mike, Mike. And then all of a sudden Mike is dead on the ground. And then Heather is screaming his name again and comes down. And Heather sees Mike's dead body propped up in the corner, standing in the corner. And the camera falls. And it's the end of the movie.
Scariest fucking scene of the whole fucking movie. When he's just standing there. Yes. Like, I don't even care about her getting knocked dead, but all of a sudden you're just like, oh my God, what is going to happen to her?
Is he going to turn around? Are you going to see the witch? Which you don't. You don't see his face and you don't see the witch. And I think when I was a teenager and that was the end of the movie, I was like,
you were disappointed.
I didn't even get to see the witch. Yeah. But as an adult horror fan now, I'm like, that's scary. Yes. Like, okay, just close your eyes. And imagine you've been hunted for 4 or 5 days straight in the woods by something that you think is a paranormal or supernatural or even like a witch, a demon force, something, an evil force. And now you're in this house. And again, it's dark. And the one person that links you to humanity, you can't find them and they leave you alone. And then you go down and you see them just staring into a corner and then something kills her.
That's fucking terrifying.
The whole movie. And I know a lot of people think this movie is boring or overrated or whatever, but the whole movie, if you were one of them, would be so incomprehensibly terrifying that the fact that it's not in your face, I think gives you free license to let your imagination run wild. And I think that's sometimes what we create in our heads can be scarier than what a movie can show us.
Absolutely.
And I think that's where a lot of movies nowadays, they falter. I think that La Llorona would have been creepier if I hadn't seen direct shots of her face and just kind of her figure. If we had just seen
the hands and stuff, yeah, that was creepier in the trailers.
Yeah, exactly. And so I know that that's kind of the era we're in. We need to be instantly gratified right now, and we want to be scared. And we want you to come up with the scariest face or the scariest set of eyes or the scariest monster. But this movie, I think, was so nuanced and did so well at scaring you with just, what do you think it looked like? What do you think the witch was doing?
Absolutely.
That's things that we create can a lot of times be scarier than any movie we've ever seen. I know sometimes my dreams are scarier than any movie I've ever seen. And they're their own horror movies. And my brain just puts that all together. And so I think that's where this movie excels. And I really enjoyed it upon rewatch. So if you haven't watched it in a while, put yourself in that headspace and see if you like it. You may not, and you may still want something more from it. A lot of people do, and I don't blame them for that. But just rewatch it if you're one of those people that was kind of iffy or bored by this movie, and see if that makes a difference in your experience with that movie.
Absolutely. You ready for some facts?
I'm ready.
You ready? Okay. To increase the fighting between all of the characters, they actually were given less food every single day that they were filming. Yeah, so that was a little psychological warfare.
That's interesting that I know they wouldn't want them to get along because they wanted them to be on edge. But then, like, do you think they, like, shook hands at the end and were like, good job, like, I'm sorry about getting tense? Or do you think they were just like, fuck that bitch, and they walked away from the job and they hated them forever?
Like, I get intensely hangry. I couldn't imagine that. You do
get intensely hangry.
I would be horrible. You guys would not.
It's so funny, like at work, when someone comes to you with a problem, and if you've eaten, you're like, yeah, sure thing. And then if you haven't, you're like, are you a fucking idiot? Why don't you know that? It's so funny.
So true. That is me. Connor.
Just keep her fed, and it's fine.
I went over to my mom's house the other day, and I was in a bad mood, and I literally had no idea why. And then we left, and Connor fed me, and I was so happy afterwards. And he's like, good to know. I'm always going to remember, if you're upset for no reason and you don't know why, feed you.
Bring a snack.
So in the beginning, when the actors are interviewing the townspeople, they were told by the director just to go interview townspeople. They had to come up with questions and stuff like that. What they didn't know is that those townspeople were plants. So they thought their reactions were real because they thought these townspeople were real. So
is the Blair Witch legend real, or was that something the filmmakers fabricated and made the actors believe was a real story?
They fabricated it. That's not a real story.
Because I know sometimes things are very loosely based on folklore.
No, not even loosely. Like, the actors thought that maybe it was loosely based. That's why they knew to ask certain questions, and maybe these townsfolk were real. But afterwards they found out and felt so betrayed that it was total imagination by the director.
Yeah, but it put them in a different headspace as actors.
This whole thing, I feel like they are almost a part of the audience themselves. They're being taken on a separate ride. Like, you are taken on a ride when you watch a movie. They were taken on a separate ride by even acting in that movie without even realizing. They didn't know what was going on. The director each moment would tell them, hey, go do that, and then scare the fuck out of them.
Yeah.
When they find out that they walked all day even, and they had come back to the same place, that was a real reaction. They did not realize they were going back to the same place, and they had literally walked all day long.
With that shit on their back.
Yes. And they carried everything except for their tent. They had a separate guy that was off camera do that.
Yeah.
So we were actually originally supposed to see the witch. When she's running out of the tent and she's screaming, oh my god, what the fuck is that? What the fuck is that? So the shots that we get are from them. They didn't have a separate camera crew. It's from these three actors. So Mike, the guy who played Mike, was supposed to pan to the left and show a witch, like, racing next to them in white.
Okay, that's terrifying,
and he forgot to. Probably because he's terrified.
He's
also
running away.
Run.
Yeah.
Because they are so scared in this movie about stuff that's going on.
Yeah.
Like I said before, she was part of why she was so traumatized at the end, and she broke down crying and had a panic attack at the very end of the movie, was they had boxes of Josh's voice screaming in the trees. They had Mike's voice screaming in the house, and that's all she's hearing all by herself.
I hate that for her.
You're gonna have a mental breakdown from that.
Yeah, but you're gonna be in an iconic movie and give an iconic performance. Was she in anything else that you know of?
Not that I know of. And then I want to bring up 2 theories. And this is just more talk, fodder. So theory 1, this is something that has been put online. And I don't know if I believe this, but it's kind of cool to think of. There's a theory going around online that the Blair Witch isn't real, in this movie, that the Blair Witch isn't real, but it's actually Mike and Josh taking Heather out to kill her.
Yeah.
So it's like, they hide the map from her. Or there's times when they're walking ahead and she can't quite hear them. Or there's times when they're talking together and she's not next to them. Or what if Josh isn't actually dead and he's just yelling out there trying to get Heather over there, and Mike's standing in that corner and he's alive just so Josh can come behind her and kill her.
Interesting.
It was an interesting theory to think of.
I wonder what the motive would be behind that. Or if maybe it was like Scream and they're just like having fun.
They're just murderers?
Yeah.
But my theory that I thought of while we were watching this, because this is one of the few we've gotten to watch together, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, we usually watch them separate, yeah.
And when I was laying there on the couch watching this with you, I was thinking, what if the Blair Witch is a Wendigo? Now, do you know what a Wendigo is?
Explain.
Okay. A Wendigo is someone who, it happens with miners and hunters and Oregon Trail people and stuff like that. Like the Donner Party, if they get stuck out in the middle of nowhere and they end up having to eat people, they have to resort to cannibalism, they turn into Wendigos. This evil spirit takes them over so that they have to consume human flesh for the rest of their lives to live.
And psychologically, too, if you know you have to, making up an excuse like that helps you live with it.
Exactly.
You know.
So, my theory, what if the Blair Witch is a Wendigo? So, we hear from Mary Brown in the beginning that she has these fur-covered arms. That's not in every story of a Wendigo, but that's kind of common too, where they're almost like Bigfoot, where they're covered in fur. Maybe. We also have noises. Like, we can assume the first time we hear Josh screaming that he's dying. What about the second time? And what about when it's coming from all over? Wendigo are supposed to be able to mimic human voices, like from anywhere. So it could be moving all through those woods, screaming and crying and sounding like him.
Interesting. So like Bigfoot.
Exactly.
It's a Bigfoot theory.
Exactly. And it moves fast and you don't really see it. And it's out there in the middle of the woods where it might have had to have resorted to eating people. That's my theory.
Interesting. That's a decent theory. You know, it's interesting because it's kind of like aliens. Like Bigfoot theories or something. I'm like, I'm not really interested. But then when I start like paying attention, it's pretty interesting. Like when you did that story in the beginning of the podcast, I was like, Bigfoot. But then I was like into it. I was like, oh, that's scary. So yeah, that'd be interesting. Did you look up Blair Witch theories, or is this just like a known thing? Like with the murder theory?
I just like to look up trivia, and I guess it's so well known that it was just on IMDb trivia. And I didn't even read all of it. I skimmed it because it is so long.
And in detail.
On IMDb, on every little thing on how Mike and Josh might be doing this. And I'm like, I read like the first paragraph or so, and I was like, ooh, those are good points. That's in depth. I'm not going to continue this, but I'll bring it up.
That poor girl.
Yeah, if that's true.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I'd rather be the first to go or the last to go. Probably the first, because then if you're still there after somebody goes, you know that they just got murdered. You know you're coming.
I wouldn't want to be the last.
Yeah.
I wouldn't. I'm so scared to die alone. So petrified of that.
Yeah, that's true. At least it didn't take her long between Mike and, if Mike was dead.
Yeah, but think of how scared she was up until that point.
That's true.
How fucking terrified she was.
Yeah.
I would never want to feel that.
Me neither. I would give this movie probably a 3.5 out of 5 on my end.
Wow, this is the first time we haven't matched on something. Well, I guess because I like the classics, we kind of don't match on that, but 5 out of 5. Oh my god.
Really?
This movie is amazing to me. It's a classic, and it scares me enough, like The Grudge, where I can't watch it by myself, and I will only watch it once a year during the light of day, and that's it.
Or wine drunk.
Because I had to. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I don't begrudgingly give it a 3.5. That's a strong 3.5, closer to a 4. If I had to say if it was like closer to 3 or closer to a 4, it'd be closer to a 4. I really like it. It probably isn't something that I will reach for to give me the thrill, but I definitely appreciated it. So I enjoyed it.
I felt even better about my 5 after reading these reviews, because I was already like, this is amazing, I'm going to rate it that. But reading the maybe it's this, maybe it's Josh and Mike, and then when I'm sitting there like, What if it's a Wendigo? It could be so many things because you don't see it.
Again, your imagination gets to run wild.
That is the best. It's literally a playground for your brain.
Yeah.
That's the best.
That's cool. That's a cool way to think about it. So thank you for joining us for episode 22. You can find us on Facebook at the Exorcisters Podcast. You can find us on Instagram at the Exorcisters Podcast. And you can find us on Twitter at the Exorcisters. You can also feel free to email us if you would like us to review a movie, or if you have stories you'd like to tell us or things to discuss. Especially right now, we would love to hear if you have any stories with haunted artifacts, specifically something like dolls.
Yeah, or anything.
You know, we got Annabelle coming. And so if you've had any experience with specifically haunted dolls, hit us up. But really any haunted artifacts, maybe something that was given to you or you picked up at a thrift store, something like that. Send us your stories because we'd love to talk about them on another haunted happy hour that we are planning. So shoot us an email at theexorcisters@gmail.com.
And next time, the ultimate experience in grueling terror. Till then, stay creepy.